Hello everyone, I'm Zach, and I'm going to teach you Dune Adventures in the Imperium in 20 minutes or so. This is my second video in the How to Play series, the first being the super streamlined Morkborg, and I thought it might be interesting to go in the opposite direction with this one. I picked Dune because I'm currently running a campaign, and at the beginning I went out hunting for something like this, and frankly found very little that was helpful. Dune is made by Modiphius Entertainment and uses their 2d20 system. It's not going to feel like D&D at your table. It's trying to emulate completely different things. It bears little resemblance to 5e or similar systems. What's more, the 2d20 system changes somewhat from setting to setting. What you learn here may not be applicable somewhat if and when you venture into Star Trek Adventures, the Fallout RPG, or John Carter of Mars. That said, if you can buckle in for the next few minutes, I think you'll find Dune to be a really fascinating system that exquisitely captures the thematic feel of this sci-fi epic. Okay, here we go. Let's start with what the game is trying to do. The best way to look at this is with the section of the book that they call Conflict, where other games like D&D or Mothership take this section to walk you through a detailed system for combat. Dune presents a total of 5 different conflict subcategories: dueling, one-on-one fights; skirmish, small-scale battles; espionage, spy stuff; warfare, large-scale battles; and intrigue, political stuff. All of these have the same level of attention and detail. The game is telling you fighting is important, but it's not all important. You can learn a lot about the types of games that designers want you to use their system to play by the mechanics that they put into that game. Dune wants players to be a part of a singular royal house. There's rules for this. It wants you to be telling stories packed with twists and turns of a thick plot and complex associations and relationships. It wants you to have an enemy house to loathe, NPC allies to rely upon, and most importantly, it wants your players just as much in the thick of the storytelling as you are. They've built whole systems around empowering player-driven moments, scenes, and accomplishments. It's a slower-paced, collaborative process that can result in astounding moments where game masters, players, and dice align to tell a story that no one saw coming. Let's take a look at how they do such a thing. Modiphius has an in-house system called 2d20, and that's what this game is built upon. At the ground floor, you'll be rolling, you guessed it, 2d20 for just about every roll. Sometimes you'll modify this by adding additional d20s, but that's about it. You won't need any other dice. Whenever you roll, you'll be going up against a difficulty level set by your GM. An average level is 1, but it could be 0, or it could be 5. The number of the difficulty level is how many successes you need to accumulate on your d20s. A crit, a roll of 1, counts as 2 successes. More on crits later. But if you're rolling the standard 2 d20s, the absolute best you could possibly roll is achieving a difficulty level of 4 by getting 2 criticals. Each die you add to your d20 pool gives you extra chances of success and critical success, so each die is incredibly valuable. If you understand this core principle of difficulty level and d20s, you should be able to grasp the rest of the game. It's all built on this foundation. Everything from conflicts to skill tests relies upon the 2d20 roll. Let's have a look at the character sheet and see how the game evolves further. Every character is built around 2 sets of stats: your skills and your drives. Skills are likely familiar to anyone who's played an RPG before. Here, skills will range in score from 4 to 8. Battle is your measure of physicality and combat strategy. Communicate is tied to social tests, kind of like charisma in D&D. Discipline is your stamina and willpower, a mixture of D&D's wisdom and constitution. Move is athletics and speed, and understand is mental challenges and knowledge. You should notice right out the gate that even battles have a mental aspect to its utility. This is a game where conflict, even battles, can mean more than just bloodshed. Drives are where everything gets weird. Drives are what pushes your character forward. They're motivations. Each character has a score in each of the drives, again from 4 to 8, though they will certainly have a drive or two that far outweigh the others. Duty is tied to your responsibilities.
Duty means poop. It does.
Faith is tied to your heart. Justice is tied to what is right. Power is tied to your own desires. And truth cares only for the cold, hard facts. Each time you roll a test with d20s, your game master will ask for a specific skill test, say communicate, for example, and ascribe a difficulty level, say level 1. To determine what number is needed for success, you will take your named skill, and then you, the player, get to select a drive that you feel fits your character and how they are motivated in the scene. Maybe in this example, we'll use justice. Add the score of your communicate and justice together, and that's the number you're shooting for to hit or fall under in order to succeed. Note I said under. Let's stay here for just a moment to make sure you got that. The Game Master calls for a communicate test, difficulty level 1. You grab your communicate score, add your chosen drive, and that sets the bar for success. You must hit or fall below that bar on a single d20 roll. Anything above is failure. You have 2 d20s to roll standard, so in this example you're going to need to hit an 11 or less on at least one die to be successful. If you roll, say, an 11 and a 12, you've done it. If you roll 2 12s, you've failed, and if you roll 2 11s, you've succeeded, and you have an extra success. If you need, play this last minute back a time or two until you've got it, because this is the next major building block in the system. Confusion here means chaos later. Okay, so you understand the concept of rolling d20s, difficulty levels, and adding skills and drives together to get your target number for success. What comes next? Everything that comes from here on out are more modular additions that are grafted on and interweave together to achieve complexity. We've laid the foundation, put up the walls, now it's time to add the plumbing, electrical wiring, sheetrock, etc. Let's cover traits first. Traits are material and immaterial possessions that your character can call upon to assist them in skill tests. Each character will start out with a few, maybe a title or a specialty weapon, or a descriptor like ruthless or wise, or maybe a bodyguard, a secret about a powerful noble, or a personal transport. The point here is that each trait is important, and you can't add a trait without a cost as the game progresses. A character's traits can be used to mitigate or increase a given skill test's difficulty level at a rate of plus or minus 1 per trait applied. Maybe being a smuggler allowed you to reduce the difficulty level of that communicate test from 1 to 0. Or maybe the Game Master rules that an upfront approach is an absolute necessity in this test, and that your smuggler trait actually raises the difficulty of the test too. With every test, there's a give and take, almost meta conversation that must take place as traits are applied by players and their GM to determine the final difficulty level. The D20 rolls happen only after all of this has taken place. The game also has a subset of traits called assets, which, as far as I understand, are simply defined as traits that are resources and can be applied to a conflict. A sword is an asset because it's a resource and can be applied to duels and skirmishes. Ruthlessness is not an asset because it's not a resource. I think the main reason for this distinction is that resources can have quality and quantity limitations, while standard traits aren't so easily defined. To summarize, traits modify difficulty levels. This then is the one way that your character might be able to overcome a high difficulty level challenge, by bringing that level down through traits. But there's a few more ways that this might be achieved. Let's roll into focuses and statements. You'll notice on your character sheet that these are tied to skills and drives respectively. Statements help you define your most important drives, and they also allow you to use the most scarce resource in the game, determination. Think of determination as an easy button that you can press as long as the test and the drive you've chosen for it matches a corresponding statement. For our communicate/justice test, if we can apply the statement, everyone should be treated equally, then we can hit the easy button, use our determination, and likely breeze through the rest of the test.
Hey, Phil. That wasn't so hard.
You can find more information on how to use determination on page 157 of the core rulebook, but in general, determination should only recharge maybe once per quest or adventure. You pick up focuses by having high stats in a given skill as defined by your class. Oh yeah, there's classes in this game. We'll cover those at the end. Focuses are cool because they deal in critical successes. If you're rolling a test and you don't have a focus you can apply to it, you only get a critical on a roll of a 1. That's going to be difficult. If you have a focus that applies, however, say bartering for that communicate test, then you will crit with each d20 that hits or falls below your communicate score, in this case, 7. Holy smokes, this means you're going to be critting over a third of the time you roll a d20 for a communicate test where bartering or gossip applies. It is through your role play and the realities within the scene that the GM will determine whether a given focus may be applied. This is really, really good, and it makes you feel like a badass for those things in which your character specializes. It's awesome, and it should be something that happens on the regular. You should be playing to your focuses. Your smuggler absolutely should be applying his bartering and gossip focuses where he can and in most situations. If the situation calls for tact and a noble demeanor, maybe someone else in the party should be chatting up that NPC. It also makes you think twice whenever you run up against that high-level difficulty test in which you have no applicable focus. A level 4 test with no focus to apply is incredibly improbable. So let's talk for a moment about those critical successes. Crits should not be rare like they are in D&D. They should happen often. At times, you'll blow through the difficulty level and achieve so many successes that you have some left over. That's important. We want to use those, and we will. But first, we should mention the opposite of a crit, a complication. Complications always arrive when you roll a natural 20 on one or more die. Depending on the test difficulty level, you might also get a complication on a 19, or an 18, or a 17, or a 16.
We seem to be made to suffer. It's our lot in life.
That table is found on page 154, but it basically says that the complication threshold raises in parallel with the difficulty level of the test. So a difficulty level 5 test is going to mean that you have complications on a roll of a 16 or greater. Complications are when you not only fail, but fail miserably on one or more of your dice. It doesn't necessarily mean that you failed the full test, just that your test success or failure is also accompanied by complication. You could roll a 1 and have a crit, and also roll a 20 on the second dice and need to mix it in with the complication alongside your success. The Game Master can use a rolled complication to impose a new temporary or permanent trait on your character, or influence the scene against you. The severity of the complication should be determined by a mixture of the stakes of the role and what the story calls for in the moment. Play by feel then. Complications always raise the stakes and always add tension. Don't shy away from them. They are the building storm, that invisible force that sets its will against the party and gives them something to rise up and conquer. But what about those extra successes? Here we come to the final piece of the 2d20 rule kit. Momentum and threat. Momentum is saved success. When you only needed 1 success but you managed to score 2, your party can have a grand total of 6 of these extra successes pocketed away. We call them momentum, and you squirrel them away for a rainy day. These momentum points can be cashed in by anyone in the party, with or without party approval, and in any of the following ways. Number 1, you can buy extra d20s. You can add a single d20 to a roll by spending a point of momentum. You can add 2 by spending 3 points, and you can have 3 by spending 6. You can also create a new trait for yourself, tied to something you just did, by spending 2 points of momentum. Usually, but not always, this trait should be temporary and may last only for the scene. And finally, you can obtain information about the current scene from the GM by spending a point of momentum. This information must be truthful, but doesn't need to be exhaustive. Momentum only recharges by those extra points of success, but those should come steadily, so don't be afraid to use some momentum to frequently juice a roll. After all, if you juice a roll, you're more likely to succeed, and thus more likely to have a few successes left over. To balance momentum, the GM has threat. It works exactly like momentum, except the GM can gain threat in a lot of different ways, and they can spend it in a variety of nasty options. You can read more about threat on page 155, but I'll say quickly that a GM using threat to harrow a party may feel in the moment like the game master is putting up roadblocks to your success intentionally. That's because they are.
Why are you the way that you are?
Again, like complications, the GM is responsible for that dark cloud that looms over every story, ensuring that the heroes don't win every time, and serving as a constant reminder that only by threading a needle over and over again can a group of people manage to weather that storm and return to the noonday sun. At least that's how it should feel. As an aside, I've also found threat useful in putting up a subtle barrier that keeps the party from going too far off the rails. With that, we have a well-rounded idea of how the system and characters work. Just a few more notes to go and we can wrap all this up and get you vested in the Imperium. Let's run a quick scenario first. Our man Corbin is trying to negotiate with the Mentat Piter in order to get a lucrative spice contract, but he's up against a wall because he doesn't have a party with him, and Piter despises talks with lowlives. You've been role-playing the scenario well, and the GM sets the difficulty level at 3, but notes that your commoner trait means that the level is going to increase to 4. Piter can smell your lack of breeding. You propose that you'll throw in the use of your safe house on Erikine for Piter's personal use to sweeten the deal. And you suggest that your smuggler trait should be applied, as it means that you have experience moving spice. The GM agrees, bringing the difficulty level down to 1 per asset and trait to a new total of 3, and also notes that you are now effectively bartering, so you can apply your focus. Crits now happen on a 7. You have 2 points of momentum on standby, and you snag one of those to get an extra d20. Now you roll all 3 of the dice at once, and you net a 3, a 7, and a 20. 2 crits for 4 successes, but with a complication. You pocket your extra success by adding it back into the momentum pool, and the negotiation concludes with Corbin getting his contract. The GM, though, uses that complication to drive the story forward with a final request from Piter. There's an assassin in our employ that's had a recent run-in with a high house. Ensure your safe house is ready for them immediately. Whew, let's talk just briefly about character classes. Dune has 2 tiers of classes. There's faction characters who belong to specific orders within the Imperium, like Mentats, Bene Gesserit, and Fremen. Think of this like choosing to play a Jedi in a Star Wars game. It's not necessary, but would it really feel like Star Wars without a sprinkling of lightsabers?
Yeah. Good.
Choosing one of these factions sets you on a course with a narrow field of choices, but it throws in some really cool exclusive options as well. In the second tier, we have archetypes. There are a lot of archetypes, ranging from commanders to scholars to spies. If you choose a faction character like a Mentat, you'll be picking from a limited range of archetypes. Once you've picked your archetype, though, you'll lock in some of your starting traits, skills, focuses, drives, and talents. Oh yeah, talents. Talents are the one thing regarding characters that we haven't talked about yet. Good thing they're simple. Talents are special abilities that make an archetype feel unique. Simple as that. Lots to choose from, and you'll feel really special when you get to use yours. Alright, so we've covered themes, the 2d20 system, tests, player characters, crits, complications, momentum, and threat. We haven't yet covered conflicts, even though we mentioned them at the beginning of this video. Remember how I said there were 5 different types of conflict? Dueling, skirmish, espionage, warfare, and intrigue? Well, all of them fit within the same base conflict system, but have slightly different rules, and I'm not going to spend the time necessary to go over each one in detail. They're not overly complex. How about we just take the fast and loose approach to this instead? Let's target the 4 most important things and let you figure out the rest when you play the game. Here we go. Number 1, zones, not grids. In Dune, there's no such thing as a combat grid. Instead, there are zones. A zone is a loose term that is meant to define a unique area or situation. Remember, conflict can be many things. In a remote area of the desert, the sand might be a zone, the rocky cliffs another zone, and the grounded ornithopter a third. In an intrigue, the zones might be different tables of various diplomats at a dinner party, or they could be defined as particular areas of politics. It's always up to the GM to define the zones. Number 2, players use assets. Assets come into play heavily during conflict. Producing an asset, moving an asset between zones, and using an asset all take an action, and you only get 1 action per turn. Thus, you'll need to be able to think tactically about what assets are important in each conflict and how best to deploy them to get the targeted victory. Using an asset requires a skill test, and a success removes the opponent's asset from the board or defeats them entirely. Assets move subtly and boldly. Number 3, you only get 1 action per turn, and just moving an asset costs your turn, unless you're willing to risk it all by moving subtly or boldly. This will require an extra difficulty level 2 move test, but if successful, you can choose to move one of these 2 ways. Subtly allows you to take an extra action immediately after, and moving boldly allows you to move an opponent's asset to a different zone after you've moved your own. Perfect for getting them out of position. Be warned though, failing that extra move test will allow your opponent an immediate free movement of their own. Number 4, finally, defeat comes after extended tests. If a player character makes a battle skill test against a minor NPC and succeeds, that NPC is immediately defeated. However, if it is the PC or a major NPC that's being attacked, the attacker must overcome an extended test. Basically, an extended test is just like any other test, except that gaining the required number of successes simply means that you score 2 points against the character. You'll need to accumulate a number of points equal to the target's applicable skill in order to defeat them. As an example, let's say that you're going up against a single opponent with a battle skill of 8. Well, then you'll need to gather 4 successful tests against them, scoring 2 points each to bring them down. There's a bit more to conflicts, but I'm confident that you can wrap your head around these 4 principles, and then the rest will easily fall into place. That brings us to the end of the video. I think the most important thing I can leave you with is to keep in mind the type of game that you're getting yourself into. It's drawn out, epic, dramatic, plots dripping with twists and backstabs and under-the-table deals, all walking right alongside religious fervor, ancient relics, and some of the best ideas about tech and the future that science fiction has ever presented. It's my belief that if you find yourself running a combat nearly every session, you've missed the point. So, keep your wits about you. Lay your hands on some of that desert power, and always bear in mind that he who controls the spice controls the universe. If you like this video, consider subscribing to our channel. We have a lot of great content, different playlists, all centered around getting you into more RPGs and making those games better. We make our very own RPG content, and there's a little bit of everything for folks to enjoy. I love all sorts of systems, and I like to dabble in designing a bit for each one. We've got 5e stuff, Mothership, Morkborg, plenty more. You can find links to all of that in the info section below. Next, I think we'll take a tour of a much simpler system, maybe Monsters of the Week? We'll see. Until then, we'll see you next time.